Hello everybody and welcome. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy chess content, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. It would really mean the world to me and it would go a long way in helping to grow the channel. Today we're going to jump right into it with more Rook endgames. Okay, so in the last video that we did, we were looking at, let me just actually bring it up here really quickly. When the Philidor position isn't possible, right? And we're playing against a B and G pawn on these files, okay? And so basically the defense there was through passive defense, all right? So, but this time around, we're gonna be looking at what happens when the pawns are more towards the center. So in this scenario, passive defense no longer works, okay? We need to go for active defense, and we're gonna see why here in just a bit with this example, okay? So the correct move in this position would be Rook to F2. Great move, okay? So why doesn't passive defense work in this specific situation though? Basically because white has more space to move around because the pawn is more towards the center. So for instance, if black were to go with Rook A8, the winning method here is pretty trivial. So basically white goes F6, pushing the pawn forward. We have king to G8, and an important maneuver here, we have Rook G7 check, king F8, Rook to H7, threatening checkmate in one. So you actually have to go back to G8, right? Because if you go towards the other side, there's just Rook H8, and you're taking your Rook on A8. And after king to G8, we have F7 check, king to F8, Rook H8 check. They're going to take your Rook. They're going to queen the pawn. A very simple victory. Right now in this position, if black decides they want to be a little bit more stubborn, and instead of moving the king over to G8, they go with Rook D8. The winning sequence is going to be pretty much the same. So we have Rook H7 with the same idea. It's to go Rook H8 check and take the Rook, right? So if you decide to defend this way, we already saw what happens if you go the other way. You go king G8, it's going to be F7 check, king F8, Rook H8, so on and so forth, right? So you go king E8, Rook H8 check, king to D7, Rook takes, king takes, F7, king 7, and we're going to be queening, okay? So there's a couple variations there. Rook A8 does not work. Pretty simple victory here for the white pieces after Rook A8. After Rook F2, however, things are not so simple, okay? So here, white goes with the move king to F6. Very dangerous move, threatening checkmate in one. How do you defend? King to G8, brilliant move, okay? Now here, this is a key defensive method to remember, right? So the correct response, moving to the shorter side of the board, okay? The rule is simple. The defending king must always head for the short side of the board or of the pawn, right? And we're going to see why in just a bit. So if you were to venture off with king to E8, for instance, white would respond with Rook to B8 check, king to D7, and Rook F8. Now the point of this move, as we've seen in other videos as well, is we want to defend the pawn so that the king could march closer towards the queening square and at the same time the pawn can advance, okay? But why is this winning for the white pieces? Now we're going to go a little bit forward. We're going to see this position. What happens if we go to the short side of the board? We have this position, okay? So what's the difference between this and this? So here, the king is in the way, is essentially the problem, okay? Because once the king starts moving forward, the defensive method would be that the rook moves up to the side and we're going to check the king from the side. But here, since the king is on D7, we don't have that option. So for instance, there's a couple of moves here that black can try, right? So first we have Rook A2. We're going to have king F7 on the board, and then Rook A7. F6, king to d6 check, king g6, still threatening to come up the board. Now the rook comes back down with the idea that, all right, we already kind of achieved checking from the side. Now we're going to check from behind. We have rook d8 check, and here is the key move. Now going back to the Lucena position, rook to d5, creating that bridge, okay? And basically all we're missing now is getting the king up the board, and it's pretty much game over. So black checks with rook to g1 check, king to f7. The king tries to harass the rook here on d5, but too little too late. You go rook e6, or king e6, excuse me. Kind of a fancy move, right? And the rook comes behind the pawn trying to stop it. Just rook e5, and the pawn is marching forward, okay? Then we have rook here, check, king f6, and there's just no way of stopping the pawn. Now, however, if the defending side, if the black pieces, they want to be a little bit more stubborn. Now, where were we here? We were here. If they want to be a little bit more stubborn and say, listen, I'm just going to keep the rook on the f file, so I'm always going to be pressuring the f pawn. Well, because the rook is on f8 now, the king can just simply come to g7, have rook g1 check, king to f7. Now the rook comes to h1. I'm going to check from the short side, but here's the problem. You're not a real estate here. You can't go to the long side of the board because the king is blocking, right? So you just go f6, rook to h7, king g8, rook comes back, and this is a very, very fancy move. Rook to a8. We're just going to go f7 and queens. So we have rook g1 check, king f8. Now the rook comes back to h1, threatening rook h8 check and taking the rook. But here, once again, the key move, rook a4, bringing that rook to the fourth rank, creating that bridge. So we have king to e6. The pawn moves forward with f7, rook to f1, threatening to take the pawn. And a little bit of a fancy move here, king to e8. Now, of course, if you take on f7, you have rook a6 check, and the rook will be dropping on the next move. That's a little bit obvious. If you go rook b1, trying to be sneaky and threatening checkmate, right? Like, for example, if you queen here, it's checkmate. You have rook to a8, rook f1, and now we're queening. So, yeah, a couple of nice variations there, illustrating why in this position we always want to go to the short side of the board. Okay, so we're going to reach the same position, but the difference is that the king's going to be on h7 instead of d7 like we saw. Okay, so king to g8. Remember, the king always goes to the short side of the board, short side of the pawn, okay? And we have rook to b8 check, king h7, and rook f8. So this is the same idea like we saw in the other variation, but now the king is on h7 instead of d7, which means that we have all this open space here on the board so that the rook could come to the side and check the king, and that is exactly the defensive method that we're going to use here. So rook to a2, great move. A couple of options here for the white pieces. It still isn't that simple. You got to know what you're doing here. So the first move, rook e8, right? What the idea is, okay, if you go rook a6 check, which is kind of the threat, I'm going to block with rook to e6. So as soon as this rook removes itself from the support of the f-pawn, we come right back to the f-file, rook to f2, making it impossible for the king to march forward without dropping the pawn. Okay, there are other options though, like for example, let's say white wants to try and play a little bit tricky, go with king e7 for instance, and we have rook a7 check. You're not going anywhere. And if you try to go king f7, same thing, rook a7 check. So here we see the importance, right, of keeping the king on the shorter side of the board, shorter side of the pawn, so we can have all this space here to check the king from the side. Okay, so after rook e8, rook f2, and here as well, white has several options. So the first idea being rook to e5. So white attempted to place the rook on f8 and support the pawn from there. That didn't work, so now we're going to try to support it from the fifth rank so that the king can march forward and get out of the way of this pawn, right? So it could come home and queen. Not so fast. So as soon as the rook abandons the control of the 8th rank, we go king back to g8 towards the queening square, right? Now, once again, white has a few options. First one being, all right, so let's go ahead and try to move the king out of the way without the support of the rook and go king to e6. Kind of the same thing, right? Whatever squares white's going to give us for the king, we're going to take. So king g7, very strong move, preventing the push of the f6 pawn once again. And if then white comes to rook e7 check, king comes to the queen square, this is going to be an equal position. And if you try, for instance, going the other way, go king to g5, same move. We're going to go once again king to g7, once again, not allowing this pawn to march forward with f6, rook e7 check, same idea. We're going to f8, rook to b7, and we're just going to hold on here. Nothing's quite happening, right? So this is going to be a drawn position as well. So after rook e5, which is probably the best attempt here for white, we come to g8, and after king e7, you guessed it, we're going back to g7 once again. Great move, not allowing the advance of the f pawn. White doesn't quite give up yet, so they go with king to e6. Now the rook comes to a2, another brilliant move. We're going to start checking from the side once again, f6 check, and basically we have achieved what we've been wanting, which is an evolved version of the Philidor position, which as a defending side, we're going to be able to hold on to a draw. All right, guys, and if you have any comments or questions, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.